Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Welcome to Storytelling in Action, collecting powerful volunteer stories, which is how we are going to gather stories that inspire our donors, our recruiters, recruit volunteers, and celebrate our impact. I'm Melissa Sherry, and I am the Volunteer Impact Coordinator here at the Commission. I've been here about 5 years, and one of the honors that I get to do here at the Commission is to be able to share impact, share training with all of you, and to be able to share impactful lessons like what we've learned through storytelling. I'm joined today with Katie Alexander. She's an AmeriCorps Vista. Katie, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Katie Alexander. I'm happy to be here with you today. I will be monitoring the chat, so if you have any questions, feel free to put them in there.
I couldn't do this without my right hand woman, Katie. So thank you very much, Katie. So let's talk about our objectives for today. What we're going to hopefully accomplish by the end of our training today is to help each of you understand why volunteer stories matter and what they could be used for. Here's a few items, in terms of donor engagement, recruitment of volunteers, recruitment of community support, and just overall impactful communication. There's a lot of noise that's out there, and truthfully, stories are the things that we remember. We're going to help you identify the best moments and the touch points to access and to ask volunteers for their stories. We're going to use effective prompts and questions that are going to help others be able to share their experiences. And I will send you out following today's training a some examples. And I have some examples in here too, but I have somewhat of a plug and play format that I think will be very helpful as you begin to think about storytelling. So, we're going to help you create simple and repeatable systems for collecting and organizing stories. That is the thing that people sometimes forget is that process that's needed to be able to really launch this in an effective manner. And then we're going to touch base on applying ethical storytelling practices that respect our volunteers and the people that we serve. And then how do you turn those raw stories or raw data? How do you bring it to life? How do you create compelling content out of that? And we're going to accomplish that today, I believe. Today's session is brought to you by the Michigan Community Service Commission. And what we do is we leverage innovation and volunteer power of our state's residents to strengthen communities and grow the ethics of civic engagement to build a stronger Michigan. We do that in many different ways. This is one of our capacity building efforts to help nonprofits build the capacity to be able to deliver your mission through service, through tools and resources that we provide. And then we also do lots of other things. We've been very busy in the disaster world lately, unfortunately. And with that, I hope that all of you have nice dry basements from all that rain that we had and that you're staying safe as we go into the springtime. It's been kind of a wild ride here at the commission here of late. Uh, so, Getting back to our topic, why stories matter. Well, stories humanize your mission. It brings to life what you're doing. And then it connects people. It connects our volunteers, our donors, our supporters, our community with the motivational encouragement to act. Sometimes it's that seeing ourselves in a story and it touches us in a way that makes us act. It makes us want to give, whether it's of our financial means, whether it's of our time, whether it's of our support, and to be able to, say, hey, this is a good and worthy cause. And then it makes the impact visible. Storytelling can happen in photos, it can happen in word, it can happen in a video, it can happen on our social media, but it makes it visible and present to people. And then those stories build the emotional connection between the work that we do and those that we need to support our organization, whether it's with funders, donors, volunteers, whoever it is the way to build that emotional connection. And truly, that emotional connection is oftentimes the catalyst for gaining the support that we need. So, what is the science behind storytelling? Well, there is actually a lot of science behind it, but I've kind of simplified it down to a couple things. We have some neural coupling, and what it does is these stories activate the neural coupling, the helping listeners as we experience the story. And when I said it, when I talked about people being in that motivation, that's at that sweet spot when they're experiencing the story. They see themselves in that story. They can empathize. They can feel compassion. They can see themselves doing X, Y, Z, and it gets them to the motivation portion of the action portion of what we oftentimes need people to do to support our mission, our vision, and our values. The emotional narratives will increase retention up to 70%. And that's by so many different studies. But you can think about stories that you remember. And I used to teach a customer service class, and I would talk about my own experience with our daughter. She was going through some really tough medical things as, I think she was like 13, 14. And I remember when I would tell that story to healthcare providers, and healthcare providers, meaning anybody that works in a hospital, and you could hear a pin drop. You could hear them breathing. I never told a story where I could hear people breathing, but I would have people come to me afterwards and they would say things like, that story really touched me. And I went back to work and I saw someone who reminded me of your daughter. And I had another person that came to me and said, it finally helped me understand what I was missing. I've been doing this for so long, and it's the grind of healthcare that is like, oh, I got to go to work. I got to deal with these people. And she said, it just changed my whole perspective of who I was serving and why. And so that was probably the most impressive story I've ever told. And I have to tell you now, you don't know the story, but that little girl is doing much better now. She's actually a nurse herself, and she tells me her stories, and I just kind of always laugh because she remembers those things, and it was because of that experience that she knew she wanted to become a nurse. And she never once wavered in that. So I think that's always kind of cool. But but donors and others and funders are 3 times more likely to give when presented with a personal story versus statistics alone. And sometimes we focus a lot on the numbers. But when we even ourselves ask for the numbers, we're always trying to back up those numbers connected with a story. And the more that you have a storytelling process, it brings those statistics to life. And then it demonstrates impact in ways that bring, well, numbers to life. I just said that. But yes, it does that. And we don't, the numbers are impressive. There's always that group that needs numbers. And I'm not one of those people. I don't remember the numbers at all. I have to have them written down, but I will remember a story. I'll remember a story about you forever after I've met you. And that's just the way my mind works. But those kind of compelling stories is where we're going. So, what makes a story powerful? Well, oftentimes it shows transformation. It shows transformation
It sounds like you muted yourself.
Hey, Melissa, I think you're muted.
You know what? I did not touch anything, but am I back?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, okay. I've got to go back. There is something that is been changed on these settings. Hold on just a moment. Can you all see the slides?
Yes.
Okay. This is so strange. I'm the only one who can't see the slides. Okay, there we go. And I'm gonna go back. Okay, so what makes a story a powerful story? So, first of all, it shows transformation. It shows what has changed. It could be within the person, within the community, within the organization, but it shows transformation. It highlights the human connection, and I think this is the most important part of a story is how we're connecting to each other and how that transformation happens. And then it demonstrates our mission in action. Whatever your mission is, it should show how you have transformed something through your mission. And the best stories include emotion, challenge, and resolution. And so think about that emotion, challenge, resolution. There are a lot of very complex story structures that are out there. I'm going to share a few, but I'm going to give you the most simple ones because I think at the heart of this, you can't make it too difficult. And so thinking about and understanding the story structures, I think makes a big difference. So, some examples of high impact stories. And here's just a few: a volunteer who changed someone's life, a moment that surprised them, whether what did they learn, what did they experience, and then the challenge that they overcame while serving. Those for volunteer stories about their own experience, I think is very valuable. And then here's some ideas for some stories. Uh, what we ultimately want is a well balanced type of stories that you collect. So it's not always just about the volunteer experience, it's not only just about the people that you serve or about how something, a program that you did, but those a wide variety of stories is ideally what I think most people want. And then you'll be able to organize your collection of stories into different types. And those types, you can make some subsets of this, but what I found are the impact stories, the resilient stories, and the change stories are really a great way to start. Just those three things. Look for impact, look for resilience, look for change stories. And then where can these stories be used? Um, just just on the surface here, using stories in volunteer campaigns, recognition celebrations, social media, community awareness, donor pitches, grants, and reports that you have to do for those. And then who can use these stories. And ideally, you will have everyone in your organization being able to use and pull these stories. And you'll see some themes and stories that go back to an impact, a resilience, or a change story. And then you'll be able to expand where you use the stories and, widen the search for the stories is what ideally will happen. But just to get started, think about these three types. Think about where these could be used and then expand from there. So I'm going to give you an example of a powerful story. And we're going to talk about the structure for a second. When the river behind James's neighborhood turned mucky brown, he stopped letting his kids play near it. Fish washed up on the banks, and the smell of chemicals hung in the air. Local officials said cleanup would take years. Our volunteers began water quality testing within days, traced the pollution to an illegal dumping site, and worked with partners to remove more than 12 tons of waste. 3 months later, wildlife returned, the water ran clear again, and James's kids were back skipping stones along the shore. You didn't just clean a river, you brought a community back to life. So it shared that quote from Jim. So the format that was used in this is the problem. It's the human plus the environmental impact. It talked about the turning point, how your organization stepped in, what actions you took, and example, the water testing, the trace pollution, the removing the waste. This shows the competency, urgency, and credibility of your organization. It demonstrated the transformation. What was the tangible, measurable change? And then the voice of the beneficiary, that emotional validation. It was that quote. You didn't just bring back a river, or you didn't just clean up a river, you brought a community back. This adds the authenticity and that emotional resonance. So think about this. There's lots of formats to be able to use, and it's a skill like anything else. But think about this, and then when you see stories told, you'll be able to start to think about those. And I would say one of the other things, I think this is kind of funny, but get on Netflix and watch a comedian. A comedian is a storyteller. And think about how they are using a format to tell a story. I'm not sure if you would agree or whatever, but who uses kind of a complicated a method for doing that is Chappelle. And I think a lot of the things that he says are kind of colorful, things like that. Leaving that aside, if you look at how he does that, it's very complex, but it's very effective. Look at simpler ones and you'll notice the format that is being used. And then the same thing when you read stories, you'll start to understand what that format is. So let's transition to when and where do we collect these stories? And the simple answer is kind of everywhere, but really and truly, the when is very important. So I would say, like, right after a meaningful interaction. I would do this during, after something happened. And in the beginning, it was like an after an oops, after a mistake happened, after we had an opportunity to correct something, whether it was a process, whether it was a mistake happened, which I always call an opportunity, by the way. And, that was some meaningful interaction. And what we did was we were able to take that from involving those closest to the work towards fixing the problem. And so sometimes those closest to the work are the people doing it. Sometimes it's the people receiving it, receiving the help. And what I would do as a reflection piece on that was always a great way to collect a story. And it showed the transformation of change. There was an issue. How did it emerge? And what was the resolution? Many times there was an emotional connection in this too. But what I found that did for the people that we were serving, and it's not applicable across the board, obviously, but for those that we were serving, it demonstrated in a very powerful way our commitment to providing the safest and the best way to deliver care, services, what have you. And so, again, during those moments of visible change or a breakthrough, at the end of a project or experience, this is a key piece in service learning, the reflection piece and what happened as a result of the reflection. So what happened at the end of the project or the experience? And then when something unexpected happens, I'll give you a good unexpected. I used to work with a volunteer who is best friends with Stevie Wonder. And I don't know how this happened. We didn't ask for this, but we would get all kinds of letters after he came from patients who talked about their experience. And it takes a lot for a patient to write a story about their experience. But I would get these letters from our CEO, and they were like, "Hey, look at this." And he wasn't asking them to do that, believe it or not, because I asked him, I'm like, "How are we getting these?" But he loved them, we loved them. And so that was the unexpected. And then during exit interviews, we've got some questions that you can ask, but when they're leaving, hopefully you've done this well before, but if you can't at any other time, during exit interviews. What about during and leading up to recognition events? We would do this quite often when we were recognizing an individual. Tell us a story about so and so. What do you like? What was most impactful about so and so service? But why do you volunteer here? What makes you come back every time? And then at milestone moments. So when data and a story intersect. So let's say someone's reached 100 hours of service. By 100 hours of service, something's happened to them. Ask them. So, how about informal conversations during your rounding? We would ask a question a lot of times about what's going well. Hey, do you have any ideas for things that we could do better around here? Or tell me about a time when you wowed a customer. Is setting up that culture of asking those questions so, they can kind of think about it and something will come to them. If you begin to institutionalize this, people will expect it. And it won't be like, "Oh my gosh, I'm not sure what to say." And then don't be afraid to capture a raw story. You can have time to collect and refine the details later. But if there's a raw story, write it down. And then here's some other practical ways of doing it too. During email check-ins, during volunteer surveys, the touch point meetings, whether it's with a group or an individual. And what about text prompts? Social media, DMs, there's always lots of stories that gets collected in there. And then when you have specific asks, sometimes, you need stories about XYZ. You need stories for, uh, stories about an event or stories about something that is impacting the organization. So at those points, you can reach out and do a specific ask. Timing matters. So fresh emotion leads to more vivid stories. This is why we collect them like right after a shift. This is why we do a reflection piece, whether it's a group activity, whether we're guiding someone through or a group through, what has changed? How did you feel about it? And then, believe it or not, volunteers do begin to forget those details about 48 hours after an event happens. So, timing really does matter. And that's not just for volunteers, that's for everyone. But and then the other thing is, uh, where timing is concerned, is building that story collection process into your workflow. And we have some ideas that we're going to share about that, but don't let it be an afterthought. Um, it needs to be a part of what we do in this organization. And so, um, we can talk about, what the timing can do is it could do things like expand your horizons. So you can recruit a team of storytellers and collectors. And those are just people that you give some basic training to, and they start to get the ideas down from people, and they're helping you expand your reach. So, and then when we talk about the enhancements, what's really great is if you do create a bank of stories that are available for use for future needs, whether it's a grant, a donor invite, communications, recruitment, and then explore. When I talk about explore, what I think is really important is as you kind of get started, to go out and ask your team what kind of stories are needed. How can you help a teammate solve a problem? When your CEO is out talking to donors, when they're talking about impact, when they're talking with their board, what kind of things are they needing? What are they looking for? How can these stories help resonate the urgency of the needs that they are sharing out in the community? And how can you position storytelling and your role to be able to help with that? So, how do you ask for stories? So I think a lot of times there's barriers. So I'm going to start on the right side, lower the barrier. When volunteers say no, or they say, I don't know, it's usually a lack of confidence. They don't know what you want. They don't know what you're, they don't know what you're looking for, but you have to help them. If you've been in some of the other trainings that I've done, I've said our role as managers or volunteer caretakers is to move those boulders, move those barriers away, make it easy for them to do what we need them to do. So timing, as I said, is important, but the timing could be off. It could be, they're busy, their mind's not in it. You caught them off guard and they just don't know what to say. So ask one simple question at a time. Keep the interaction about the story under 2 minutes when you're gathering it, and then let people speak and not write. So on the fly, I think the keeping it under 2 minutes really works. And then when you're refining it, I think you do have to let people speak, and you have to let people just tell you the story, not tell them, write this down in this instant, but let people kind of get the thoughts flowing a little bit. And then uh, volunteers shouldn't feel like they're writing an essay. It really needs to be very short, very quick, very precise, just, quick and simple, really. Create, and then one of the ways you could do that is creating story capture forms. And this is one of the things that we'll send to you afterwards. And then providing easy prompts. I have some examples of those. And then talk about that peer-to-peer storytelling. I love the idea of helping volunteers have a new role in our organization by helping them help us capture those stories. And don't forget that photo is another caption method, and follow up storytelling. Again, you can always polish it and create depth in the story later, but just getting it down is, for many people, it's the hard part. And then capturing it, and how do you do that? And then again, as I've said this before, creating those reflection moments. Someone did something once, and I thought this was kind of cool. Tell me something great, or tell me something impactful that happened during your shift. Tell me who you helped today. Tell us a story about that. Was there something that stood out to you? And then make it fun. Just as you get started, I think you need to lower the temperature of it. It can be very intimidating for people to do this. And so make it fun. Set a goal for the numbers of stories that you're going to collect to begin with. And so I promised you some story prompts, and here they are. So here's really 10 great story prompts. And tell us about the first time you volunteered with our organization. How does volunteering make you feel? Tell us how one experience you've had while serving that you'll never forget. How has your life been impacted by service? What's the most rewarding part about volunteering? What would you say to someone who's thinking about serving with us? What was it about us that inspired you to become a volunteer? What's one thing you learned that you wouldn't have known otherwise if it weren't for your time with us? How does volunteering in your community make it a better place? How does what we do make the community a better place? So there's lots of nonprofits out there. What's so special to you about us? So those are, I think, are easy ones that someone would be able to give in just a few seconds. I'm not going to read all these, but here are as you're interviewing people, and a lot of times what I would do with stories is I would be interviewing people that we've served and people that have served us. So this is a little bit more of that, but I think that as you start to delve in more to those conversation, this is a few questions that you can tap into. You'll get the slides later. You don't have to write all of these 20 questions down. So building a story framework, as I said, to begin with, that stories have a framework. Storytelling is a framework. So this is very, very simplified, but in the beginning, what's happening? In the middle, what did you do? And in the end, what changed? And some of the things that we do is we basically, in the prompts, like a writing prompt, we'll give these three things to kind of mine out the story. Make it simple, make it easy. Now, I'm not going to go through all the details about these, but if you want more common storytelling frameworks, some are more advanced than others. This last one that I gave you is so very, very basic. And to get started, just use something so very basic. Don't worry about the details. But here are some other ones. It's that hero's journey, the Freytag's pyramid, the story spine, and this is a great one. Pixar story framework, they have a great one. And the who, what, why formula. And then, like I said, you can go check out your favorite comedians, and you'll see that they adapt a storytelling format to their presentation as well. And so, what I think is kind of cool about that is that you will start to zone in and you'll start to pick out what that framework is. But as you start to recognize that, that helps you develop a more sophisticated depth to your own stories as you're collecting. So if you want to make this easy and you want to make people help people do this, make it comfortable for them to share, for sharing. So again, as I said, just start so simple, but normalize imperfection. It doesn't need to be polished. Offer multiple formats. People have an easier time doing this in different ways. Sometimes it's audio, it's text, whether it's written down or actually texting you.
Man.
It's so then the multiple formats, the audio, the text, the video, the voice memo. Think about like what is easiest for for you as you're doing this, and for them, I'm sorry. And then avoid putting volunteers on the spot in the public eye. I know, like when we would have volunteers do a media push for us, and they would help out with a media thing, and they tell a story. We would do some coaching with them ahead of time, and then the other thing is building trust through relationships. On one, you have to know what are they going to say when they get out there. So, having that trust and longevity, having them fully understand what's going to happen, things like that. I will say, in the beginning, in one of the places that I worked before, we would have recipients give a testimonial, and I I wasn't really involved in this, but I ended up stepping in to help because these stories would go way off the charts. And I remember sitting in the audience going, "Oh my goodness." And they would offer suggestions, well-meaning. And I'm not making fun of anyone doing this in any way, shape, or form. I think it's very brave for someone to get up and to tell their story, um, because they're showing vulnerability, but they definitely need to be coached, and they need to be able to stay on script for what needs to happen. And that is what was always lacking when they would do that. So it was, and when you go into those uncharted territories, it becomes a little uncomfortable. So that's my lesson for, one of those things to watch out for. So, but it goes nicely into creating systems for storytelling. So, why do you need a system? Well, if you've been to any of my other trainings, I always talk about process, process, process. And the actual doing is a very small part of really having something, an initiative stick. So, without a system, you don't have any organization, and you really don't have stories. You have a collection of something, but it's not really anything that you can use very well. And I want you to think of capturing stories like this. It's capturing value you are already creating. Why let that slip away? Every day you are creating impact. You are creating value. You're creating stories. And if you don't have a system, you're letting all of that good stuff slip away. Don't let it slip away. You're going to stop losing your best moments. And those best moments can be so absolutely impactful. You'll be able to use the stories when you need them. And then the people who need them will be able to know about them, and they'll be able to access them. Uh, it's proven to improve, it's a proven fact that stories improve funding outcomes because it's evidence of impact. And it tells it in a way that strengthens the numbers. It's not just the straight numbers, but it strengthens the numbers. And it really needs to be everyone's job to collect stories. And think of it as increasing your volume. You're one person. But if you increase your volume up to two, 100% increase. And then even with two people collecting stories, you doubled the diversity of the stories you're going to get. And then over time, as you do that, you'll get better at getting authentic stories. I think moving more towards authentic stories and really not making them sound too Pollyannish or too well rehearsed, I think is a key that comes with time. And then you'll see patterns over time. You'll see patterns of like, hey, we've done XYZ hundreds of times. One of the things that I worked with in healthcare is reducing falls. And you would think like, okay, stories, falls, numbers, okay. So falls are a huge deal. People can die from a fall. And we had people literally saving people's lives by talking to them about falls prevention. And then what that kind of morphed into is how does everyone have a role in preventing a fall? And then where does this go from there? So we had all these stories, and what we could see over time is the stories reduced the falls because people were cognizant of things that they could do, including just as simple as wearing a pair of socks and compliance with wearing socks. Making sure that if you are visiting a loved one, that you do things like you put their in the hospital bed, by the way, you put their remote that has their nurse call light next to their bed before you leave. And what does that do? As this is your mom in the bed, you could save her life by doing that because she could try to get out of bed. She needs to use the restroom. You're not there now. And you just moved it out of the way to sit there and talk with her, get those crazy cords out of the way. And then what does that do? It creates a moment of a fall. So what we did is we talked about these things, we taught people these things, and then the stories even why someone was on a fall prevention began to go from these wild stories down to one single story. And that was a pattern that we saw. And then we could also see over time how falls were practically some falls were all ultimately eliminated. And so we could see those patterns over time. And then here's the next thing, and I think that this is for all of us, is reducing our stress. It's no more digging at the last minute or settling for weak examples of stories. You have meaningful things, impactful things that say, this is why we do what we do. This is the importance of our work in action. And here's the evidence. So do you need a system? Yes. Oops. I am so sorry. I am Okay. So how do you start your story collection bank? Think of this as introducing a change. It may be something that you've liked stories. It may be something that, oh yeah, we have stories. But if you don't really have those systems that we're going to talk about, you really don't have a collection bank. So I want you to think about this as introducing a change to your organization. You first want to have leadership support. So when you go talk to your leader or the CEO, your executive director, what problem can you solve? What problem, what challenge do they have? And you can bring it right back to showing the evidence for that problem. If your CEO's number one problem is, I'm not sure where funding's coming from. Well, we're working hard. Your staff is working hard every day, and we're, making an impact. And this is a way through storytelling to be able to capture that evidence, to equip you. It's one more tool in your quiver to be able to go out and to get us that resource and that capacity support that we desperately need. And then getting others on board, asking people to change the way they do something, asking someone to do something else is hard. It's that old saying, everybody can change, but you go first. So you, as a change maker in the organization, have tremendous influence. You can solve their problem and get them to come along with you. And then as you do this, what is the problem that they're solving? So talk to your coworkers, talk to those who are, heading up your campaign, uh, writing your grants. What's the problem? What is it that they need? What kind of evidence do they need to show the impact of your organization? And then introduce the idea, what if we could train volunteers? What if we could train our staff to become really good at capturing these stories. And then what if we had this bank that you could go to and it could be organized so you could pull something out, just like a library book, just to say, hey, you know what? Here's exactly the story that I need that will demonstrate how we need this help and how what we're doing is been so effective. If only you could help, you, the donor, whoever it is, the community, be able to solve this problem. And then normalizing imperfection. It isn't the goal. So we want things to be imperfect. We should expect it. If we were waiting for just every story to be perfect, every system to be perfect, we'd probably never get it off the ground. But we're going to give you some first steps to begin to organize your process. And then you'll be able to expand on it to mold it and to fit your organization's needs. So I would also stress making this so simple, making it accessible to all, and celebrate those early wins. That's so very important. So if you got to 30 stories in a month or 50 stories in a month, celebrate, 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 celebrate. And, find a way to honor those people. Make it public, make other people know about it. And so then it starts to tell that story. If you use volunteers and you have a little storytelling team, encourage them to tell their story about how they got involved in this. It's probably nothing that they ever expected, but think about that and think about how you could celebrate those wins. And then focus on process and then how to perfect it. Don't just go out and collect a story today. Focus on the process to collect the story. Get that buy-in from your leadership. Get others on board. Help them see a future that is better with storytelling. And then work out those details and processes. And this is one that's so very important. Work out the details like the permissions, where stories are going to be sold and how it's going to be accessible. And then brainstorm the what. What kind of stories do you need? Do you need one about funding? Do you need one about, your capital campaign? Do you need one about the building? What kind of stories do you need? But work out those processes before you go out. Just don't go out and do it. So I would say use technology too. And I've got some more in-depth collection things. This is more collection, but storage things to share next. But a Canva video recorder, I think that is always an easy way to do it. And the person obviously would need to be comfortable doing that. But also on a very simple way, Google Forms and upload a file if they're writing it. JotForm allows you to update videos and pictures and files. And then a voice memo like Typeform is a good one. You can put it in your volunteer management data system, so story fields. That could be in your surveys. It could be in your checkout process, at the end of the shift. It could be however you design it. But use your story, use your sign-up process, add a reflection piece, and just build that into that work strategy that you have. So here's some really great options. So those were really simple, but as you get to the point where as you're working through these details, think about the options that you have for creating your story bank. One, use a simple form link. So staff and volunteers can pull it up on their phone. Just use one. Just have a centralized way, whether it's a link, whether it's a QR code, whatever it is, that people could just, upload the story real quick. And most of us do carry our phones around. And then as you create a centralized place for your story bank, here's a few options. Airtable is one. It's pretty flexible and simple to use. And it works like a spreadsheet, but acts like a database. And then Notion is a good one that is kind of like hits the sweet spot for nonprofits. It's good for organizing stories and narratives, and it's less structured and more story friendly. And then if you're more complex, a large organization, HubSpot CRM, it's stories that are tied to donors and volunteers. So it kind of connect those there, and then it tracks the engagement and communications in one place. And then really for very large and complex grant tracking, large organizations, Salesforce Nonprofit Cloud, it can connect stories to outcomes and reporting. I would say start small. You can evolve into something bigger, but I just wanted to share this because those that do this really well, organizations that are very um, complex and organized, believe me, they do their storytelling and they have story banks. And then I just want to give you a reminder about doing things the right way. And again, I go back to plan, 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 plan. And we used to use a thing called plan, do, check, act. So the planning, like 75% of your time is in planning. It's setting up the systems, it's getting people ready to do this. Doing it is just a little part of it. So you do it, it's a pilot. And then you're checking what went well, what's going, what do we need to do differently, and fixing things. And then act. And it's a continuous cycle. So you're putting those changes into place at that point during the act part. And then you're doing it again. So it's a continual flywheel of continuous improvement. But as you set things up, think about doing it the right way. So one of the first things is get consent and be consistent with your organization's policies. No secret, I worked in healthcare for a long time, and we have patient privacy that we have to be careful and consistent with. So make sure that your storytelling isn't inadvertently violating a policy. There's a reason why those protections are in place. And then get a storytelling release. Have someone sign a release. Protect privacy. Even changing names is okay. Don't make a story so specific that somebody's going to figure out in the community when you're telling it on Facebook exactly who this is. And then have ethical story collecting policies and procedures that will guide behaviors and the practices that you're using. And one of those really comes back to avoiding the trauma. Don't collect story in the way that reintroduces pain or distress or harm to get a compelling narrative. That's not where the nugget of the story usually is. So think about that, and then think about testimonials. I mentioned this before, but it's so important with testimonials from people that are outside of your organization, especially, is you should know how you will use that testimony and having coaching available. Someone should never just get up and, riff and tell their story. It'll go way, way off. So coaching someone through that story and having solid practices so someone can tell the story with the desired impact, because that's what would happen. It wouldn't have the desired impact. I was focusing on the wrong things. And let volunteers review their stories, or let the person review their story before it's shared. And then turning stories into impact. So where can you use stories? These are just a few things. You'll find other ways to use them, but donor letters, social media, volunteer recruitment pages, annual reports, grant applications, and recognitions events. Some of these I've already mentioned. But the other thing is, where can you also mine stories from? And I would say thank you letters are one. on social media, what you're hearing and seeing, people commenting on your organization, what you're doing, and how those that not only support you but serve your organization in other ways. It might be a vendor, it might be another organization who works with you on a project. Think about that. So you'll almost need to create like a sphere of your influence. Who are all those people that support you and work with you in different ways? And what stories do they have? So this is one I think is where it really comes to life. And I think for those that need these stories the most, our CEOs, our campaign people, our grant writers, our board members, they need stories plus the data that equals the maximum impact. So wherever you're able to pair stories with numbers, whether it's the number of volunteers, whether it's hours served, people reached, program outcomes, even savings that you have. Not to say that, we eliminated 4 positions, we brought volunteers in and we saved this much money. I'm not saying that, but what was the impact? I worked with an organization once that worked with a volunteer group that did fundraising for a new building. And the stories that they told were incredible and how proud they were. And then we kind of revisited those stories when we had to go back and do a capital campaign to do some improvements and expansion, which is a good thing. And so one of the most important things was, or one of the most impactful things was how a second generation in a family came in to help. And their grandparent told them about their work that they did, how they recruited people to give, and how they were able to raise this money for this cause. And now the grandchild is doing that as an adult. So think about those kind of stories and think about the impact and how it becomes, you take those numbers and you bring them to life. So here's a thing, and I'm going to need your help, Katie. As we're wrapping up, I want you to all think about one thing that you're going to do this week. And I'd love it if you'd share it in the chat. I know we're coming up on time, but I want you to purposely think about one simple step that you will commit to doing this week that will help you in building your story, collecting your story processes, things like that. Because again, every day you're making impact, but without a process, you're just letting that gold mine of evidence slip away. So, what are you going to do this week? One simple takeaway that you're going to commit to doing this week. I'd love it if you'd put it in the chat for us, and we're going to take a look at it afterwards. So, I do want to kind of move to wrapping up, and hopefully you could do both of these at the same time. But storytelling positions organizations to use what you're already creating to build capacity and resources. This isn't just a nice thing. It's really a key to our survival as nonprofits in a tough world. There are lots of nonprofits. There are lots of places people can give, but make it so yours is the easy place to give. They see it. They see the evidence in action. They see it in those stories. But keep it simple and just get started. And then the potential and the impact will grow as you develop and define your processes for storytelling. But define those processes early so you just stay out of some hot water and that you have a clear way for people to get started with you. And then when we send out our little plug and play guide, that'll help you get started as well. And then getting everyone involved. Again, you need that leadership buy-in. You need the support from your peers. And how you could do that is talking about a future better state, how this opportunity could solve their problem, and getting them emotionally invested in it. The best outcome is that you have a storytelling bank to pull from that's well organized and accessible to all. And then as your organization, as you organize your storytelling effort, as I've said this, build those good processes that are consistent with, the rules of engagement for your organization, those policies and procedures. Use technology to keep it organized, and be smart about how and where you're seeking your stories. And keeping in mind that more people collecting, the richer the stories are, the more diverse the stories are going to be. But yet, don't strive for perfection. You can polish those stories later. And so, with that, I want to say thank you for joining us. And I hope that this has been impactful for you, and that it has really helped you see what the impact of service can be for all of us with these stories. Any thoughts or questions from anyone? If you want to continue to put things in the chat, that's great. Thank you. Thank you all. I really appreciate that. Well, I hope you all have a great day. And I hope that you'll join us next week as well. We've got some really great, impactful sessions coming up here in the near future. So, with that, I'm going to go ahead and end it today, and hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.